In Tech Watch, as school districts turned to remote learning in the pandemic, some administrators introduced surveillance technology. In Minnesota, for example, the Minneapolis School District used software from Gaggle. According to the 74, which is an education-focused news website, the technology allowed schools to track what kids were doing while logged into school-issued Google or Microsoft accounts. At a time of heightened social isolation, supporters praised the software for helping to keep students safe from dangerous content online. But critics say continuous monitoring makes students less likely to ask for help in times of crisis. So all of this is explored in a new article by reporter Mark Keierleber. He's a reporter with the 74, and he joins me now to talk a lot more about this. Thank you so much for joining us, Mark. This is really interesting, and I don't even, you had me thinking, like, was this technology on my kid's laptop that she took home for school? I don't know. But let's give everyone the basics. Gaggle monitors the digital files of more than 5 million students across the country each year, and 81% of teachers report having similar software in their schools. Can you tell us just how this software works? What were the sort of things it was supposed to flag and did flag?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on. So Gaggle and similar software, they use artificial intelligence to sift through students' files. In Gaggle's case, it looks through files attached to students' Google accounts or Microsoft accounts. We're talking about the homework assignments that students are using, or that they're working on with, like, Google's online, like, Word documents, their chat feature, Google Hangouts, and also their emails. And so it uses artificial intelligence to track down keywords that might indicate some form of self-harm or violence or inappropriate behavior. And they use a team of remote content moderators to essentially look at that material and determine whether or not it rises to the level of concern that they're going to give to school officials, like in Minneapolis or elsewhere.
Okay, so that's the basics. So Gaggle reported that it identified a significant increase in threats related to suicide, self-harm, and violence nationwide, particularly between March of 2020 and March of 2021. But preliminary mortality data from the CDC for people of all ages show a 5.6% decline in self-inflicted fatalities in 2020 compared to 2019. So now, some of this data that Gaggle is providing, they're using to sell the product. But I guess what I'm asking you to do is, can you put the data in context? Like, we know that this is the kind of software that can flag people who are in desperate need. But how accurate are those numbers?
Yeah, that's a great question. First of all, I should highlight the fact that suicide and self-harm is a significant concern for young people. CDC data usually runs on about a 2-year lag, so we're still waiting for some, harder, evidence from them. But early indicators do suggest that there was a decrease, and that also holds up in Minneapolis as well. It's important to note that the Gaggle saw a significant increase in customers during the pandemic, and more kids spent more time online. So those conversations that typically would have been happening in the hallways were happening in Google Hangouts and in other digital spaces. So that created an additional opportunity, I guess, for Gaggle to catch those conversations and to be a part of that. So it's possible that that's driving the increase. Now, when I'm sifting through some of the the data from Minneapolis, that there are students that are talking about serious issues, but there are also questions to the degree to which those flags are actually pointing to students who are at risk of harming themselves. My data indicated that it caught up students talking about in their SEL journal, their social emotional journal, talking about feeling depressed, I also talked to families and to students who were talking about how Gaggle had actually flagged some of their classroom assignments, and how it looked at a song lyric, for example, that they had written about, and it wasn't actually something that was, a critical safety issue at that time.
Right. So, if you were having trouble and you got intervention than you needed, I'm sure you're really grateful for this, for surveillance. If they're flagging an assignment that you got, I could see it being very unnerving. Were students aware of sort of the degree, students and parents aware of the degree of surveillance? And how did they feel about it, both students and parents?
Yeah, that's a great question. According to officials in Minneapolis, they say they left it up to individual schools at the school level, principals, to really notify students that this was happening. And from the folks in Minneapolis and elsewhere that I have talked to, they really weren't aware that this is something that was going on. And certainly that's troubling. That was infuriating to many of them when they found out that they were being monitored in this way. And to your other point about students who, were at risk of harming themselves and were notified by the software, there's concern that that monitoring their communications and outing them for those issues could actually have a detrimental effect as well. It could potentially, this is anecdotal, of course, but potentially convince students not to come forward to ask for help, because they feel like they don't trust the systems that are in place if they're surveilling them.
Yeah, as a parent, I'm sort of like on both sides of this, because of course I would want to know if my child is struggling. And sometimes you ask directly and they don't give you straight answers. The flip side is, it's sort of like in many ways rummaging through someone's diary, even though I know it's a sort of school issued laptop and all that sort of stuff. And at a very kind of basic level, that's just wrong and not nice. And you wouldn't want someone to do it to you. So I can see how this can be a complicated issue for school districts to navigate, especially in the wake of, really an unprecedented time of remote learning, across the board, and a pandemic on top of that. Mark, it was a really fascinating article. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
So, in a statement to CBS News, the CEO of Gaggle, Jeff Patterson, says in part, quote, "In a school setting, whether virtual or in person, adults have a legal obligation to keep kids safe. Gaggle is one of the many tools available to help school administrators keep watch over students and intervene when kids are getting into dangerous situations online." And he goes on to say that, quote, "This is not about punitive surveillance or spy tech. This is a proven technology that has helped schools protect kids and save lives." CBS News also reached out to the Minneapolis School District for comment as well, but we did not hear back from them.